Earlier this week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott threatened to take over elections in Harris County, citing concerns about voter registration linked to P.O. boxes. But county officials are pushing back, saying that the state has no authority to take over local elections, while characterizing Governor Abbott's threats as politically motivated. Joining us now is Interim Harris County Attorney Jonathan Fombonne, here to explain the county's response and what comes next. So first, welcome to Hello Houston.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And second, if you would like to join the conversation, have questions, concerns, you want to share them with us, give us a call or text at 713-440-8870.
Jonathan, before we jump into that conversation around Governor Greg Abbott, you, before serving as Christian Menefee's direct advisor as the first assistant county attorney, you were a partner at Kirkland & Ellis. Can you tell us about your path moving from the private sector into public service and kind of what motivated you to join the Harris County Attorney's Office?
Yeah, so I was a partner at Kirkland & Ellis doing commercial litigation largely, and when I was there, I met a young attorney named Christian Menefee who decided to run for county attorney. And I'm not from here originally. I didn't know what the county attorney's office was. But he said, he was going to run for this office. And as I learned more about it, and then he invited me to come and help run the office, I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity to, really impact the people of the county, sort of change what the county attorney's office could do, and really bring some of the skills and experiences I'd gotten in private practice to the public sector. And 5 years later, here we are.
Yeah, and you recently told the Harris County commissioners you plan to, quote, help them understand the legal landscape, finding solutions to legal problems, raising issues when we need to, and staying out of the way when we don't. You also oversaw the county's litigation efforts. So what does the current legal landscape look like right now in Harris County? Bring us up to the fold to where we're at now.
Right. So, we could talk about this for hours because Harris County is huge. Part of the reason we're here today to talk about elections is because Harris County is huge. 5 million people, about 2.5 million registered voters. And what that means is the range of issues we deal with in our office every day run the gamut from real property issues to tax to contracts to litigation. So it's really everything. The sort of big issues we're facing today involve, as you know, voting rights and voting procedures. The state and the county have not seen eye to eye on this for a few years now. I think there's some legal but really political reasons behind that. And as we enter these primaries and then these midterms, that's something we're looking at closely.
So let's talk about what the governor said and why you're here today and what our concerns should be. And so Governor Abbott did say he wanted to strip the county of operating elections and place the election administration under state control. Let's just start there. Does he have the authority to do that?
So the governor does not have the authority to do that. What he's referring to, most likely, and I have not talked to him about this, is a bill that was passed by the legislature in 2023, I
Bill
believe.
1933?
That's right,
Yes.
Senate Bill 1933. It was sponsored by Senator Paul Betancourt, and it applies only to Harris County. And it basically says that if there's a pattern of misconduct by any of the officials that run elections, so here we're talking about the county clerk who runs elections or the county tax assessor collector who runs voter registration, the state can receive complaints, investigate them, and if certain thresholds are met, they can come in and take over the administration of elections of the county. Now, that hasn't happened here at all. What the reason, and I believe this tweet from the governor came out last week, is that 2 months ago, I think, Senator Betancourt himself sent a letter to the tax assessor collectors saying he had found a bunch of people on the voter rolls who were registered at P.O. boxes, and that this violated Senate Bill 1111. That's another bill that he sponsored, I think, in 2021, which says that you cannot claim residence at a commercial P.O. box. And so that was treated by the Secretary of State as a complaint under that Senate Bill 1933. An investigation was opened. My understanding is that the Secretary of State's office does not think that there was any kind of misconduct by the tax assessor collector. And in fact, the tax assessor collector did exactly what the law requires. When someone registers to vote, it is not the tax assessor collector's job, the voter registrar's job, to say, we're going to go through this and say, I don't think that person actually lives here. They have to accept the registration. But if somebody raises the issue, they're supposed to send a notice to that voter and say, hey, there may be a problem with your registration. Do you actually live here? And if that voter responds, no, I don't, then they can be taken off the voter rolls. Anyway, that's exactly what happened here. The tax assessor collector send those notices out, and that's all that the law requires. And so there's just no basis for any takeover of elections.
A couple little points here just to clarify. Approximately how many registered voters are there in Harris County?
I think it's about 2.5 million.
2.5 million. Yeah. We're talking about, I think, around 100, correct?
That's what was raised by the complaint.
And of that, we don't see, and you probably addressed this already, but just to clarify, we didn't necessarily see fraud in these 100. It was just they had registered at their P.O. boxes, presumably, which is probably where they got all of their mail. And so they just had put that information down, maybe an error, but it didn't seem to be, from the investigation, from looking into any kind of organized fraud.
Right. No, certainly not. And again, the process exists to work in this way. It says if someone brings an issue to the voter registrar that says this person doesn't really live here, and by the way, it's not limited to P.O. boxes. There's already a process in state law that says, if you believe your neighbor is claiming residence at a different house, but he lives next door to you, you have the ability to submit essentially a complaint to the voter registrar. And if they believe that there's merit to the complaint, they send a notice to that voter and for them to confirm. But there are all these checks along the way to make sure that we don't get to the point where a voter who doesn't reside in the right place votes in that place. So like you said, when we talk about fraud, I think what we think of is a voter who's either not allowed to vote, casting a vote, or who's allowed to vote but not allowed to vote in a certain place, casting a vote. No evidence of that happened here.
Okay, one other thing. Celeste was ready to go, but I'm going to jump just right in here.
Sure.
So then the question becomes, why are you here? Why is this now an issue? It sounds like from what you're saying, concern was brought up, concern was looked at, concern was corrected. How do we then get to the level that the governor is saying, there's corruption here and we need to take it over, and then you step in to say what?
I think this is where politics comes in, unfortunately. My job as the county's legal advisor is not necessarily to be political, but sometimes I have to tell my clients, hey, you did it right. The reason that you're hearing these things from the governor now it's not because you did something wrong. It's because of politics. And I think what we know is that the governor has said that he's going to spend millions of dollars in Harris County to try and unseat Democrats. And there are many ways you can do that.
Turn it deep red. That's what he said.
Turn it deep red. That's right. There are many ways you can do that, but one of the ways you can do that is by sowing distrust in our election system. So nothing happened last week to cause him to tweet that. Like I said, Senator Betancourt had submitted his complaint very publicly, by the way. He had tweeted that really, I think, a couple of months ago. But I think as we get closer to, well, first of all, the primary, but also the general in the fall, you're going to see more and more things like this.
So it's interesting. So Jonathan, partisanship aside, what are your top priorities as the new Harris County interim attorney, especially during this transition period, and especially given the fact that you're kind of coming into this space where, Christian Menefee is running for the 18th district. We've had a lot of news around the redistricting. Here you are now. Talk to us about that.
What's great about coming into this job is that I know what the job is, and I've done a lot of it the last 5 years. My goal really is to keep the ship steady. My appointment ends in November, so I'm not here to try and necessarily rock the boat, but to continue a lot of the efforts that we created, and also to build on those. So, and that can be anything from our environmental group that does fantastic work, suing concrete batch plants that operate without valid permits. It includes our consumer protection group that's doing phenomenal work, going after people who really defraud normal people every day through things like deed fraud and all sorts of other deceptive trade practices.
Sorry, I want to pause you on the deed fraud. I know that there was a major case that we spoke to Menefee about regarding one of the biggest Harris County deed fraud cases. Can you tell us where we're at in that?
People are getting their deeds
stolen
without being aware of it
by a specific.
It was a person. It was two people.
A couple.
A woman named Alba Martinez and her husband.
Yes.
I believe that she's now under indictment or under investigation. So there's a criminal aspect to this. We have nothing to do with that.
Okay.
But we filed a number of lawsuits related to those. It's very hard when you do that sometimes to recover the property, right? Because what happens
That's
is...
what I was going to ask. What happened to those
Well,
folks?
what happens, right, is sometimes the deed fraud happens and then the property gets sold and then gets sold again. And the law doesn't really allow you to go back and take property from someone who bought the property in earnest. But what we've been able to get is some civil penalties assessed against Ms. Martinez and an injunction really that she cannot do this kind of activity again without suffering some serious consequences. Now, sounds like there may be other criminal consequences, which will probably be more serious for her. But on the civil side, what we can do is get these injunctions, get these civil penalties, and hopefully sometimes get restitution, and that's just paying money back to the people who were defrauded.
Let me just ask this then for folks listening, and I know we went over this with Menifee when he was here, but just tell people what they can do so they don't find themselves victims of this type of a crime, because it's really insidious.
No, that's right. And this one is particularly hard to protect against because a lot of people inherit property, right? They don't know the deed history, right? The deeds are recorded with a county clerk. It's very technical things that people don't really realize are an important part to proving that you own real estate. But being mindful of that, checking the clerk records if you have any kind of doubt. And also, you can
regularly check of your property
that's
status.
Right, yeah. And you can go to scamfreehc.com. That is a website we set up that has information related to not just this type of consumer fraud, but consumer fraud generally, including some tips on how to protect yourself and a place to also report that kind of fraud. So to see if our office or maybe another office can look into it and maybe take action if possible.
Yeah. I want to take you back, though, if we can, to the election situation. And we hear the governor say what the governor says. We know that we're in a time of people have a lack of trust in the systems that are out there. How can you assure voters now that moving forward into these, there's a special election end of the month, there's a primary election, there's a full election, there's a lot of elections.
Yes,
we love to vote here in this area.
Year.
That it's safe and secure and that they are going to have their voices heard. What are you folks doing in your office to ensure that along this path?
Well, first of all, what I would say is that it's important not to buy into the narrative that our elections are not safe and secure. And in fact, the Secretary of State's office, ever since I've been in government, has made public statements, and some of the people who've made those statements, unfortunately, were punished for it, that our elections were safe and secure. And even though we've had some issues, that's to be expected for a county this size. I mean, again, 5 million people,
2 million plus voters.
2 million plus voters. The geographic size of the county, I don't think people appreciate that when you have polling sites that are in a place, I think I might be wrong about this, but the size of Rhode Island, it's a very hard thing to manage. Some things will happen at the margins, but that's all it is. It's at the margins. And you mentioned earlier, Ernie, that we were talking about 100 P.O. box addresses, and that's just registrations, not necessarily people who voted. So the idea that there's this sort of rampant fraud out there, mismanagement of elections, is just not true. I see our role as guiding the tax assessor collector and the county clerk to make sure that they're following the law, to make sure that if something happens later, they can go back and say, no, we followed the election code to a T. If something happened, it may be because of some other actor. Elections is run obviously by these offices, but by a lot of people who are really part-time workers, and they're trained as well as we possibly can train them, but mistakes may happen. And if those mistakes happen, it's also important to educate the public that they're not having an impact on the results of elections. I think that's the most important thing here, is that when people go to the polls, they know that, yes, maybe 1 or 2 voters, may have registered at the wrong place, or maybe didn't know the exact specifications on how you're supposed to register to vote. But that's a minute amount of people. I've voted almost every election in Harris County. It's generally very well run. I don't have to wait very long, and I've never doubted that the result of an election, even if it's the candidate that I didn't want to win, wasn't the result.
Yeah. There's also a lot of talk about poll watching and who's coming in and who's going to watch, and I don't know where that sits currently. And I know elections isn't your bread and butter of this, but watching over these kind of lawsuits and concerns about it, what should we as voters be aware of and look for when we go to polls to know that it's being run honestly, fairly, that there isn't interference, and where do we report if we see these issues?
Yeah. So first of all, poll watchers have been allowed under this election code and most states' election codes for years. It's not a new thing. And typically poll watchers are appointed by the respective parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. That's just part of the process. They can watch the votes, and they can also watch the counting of the votes, and that happens every election. But that's something that people should take to heart, to know that there are regular civilians who have a vested interest in the outcome, paying attention to what happens. So that's something that's out there. Sometimes we talk about poll watchers coming from the federal government. I'm not aware of that happening in any of the upcoming elections. When that happens, we work with them closely to make sure, they're not interfering with anything, but they're also able to observe, and they're allowed to come and do that. If you're a voter, what I would always say is, if you go to the polls, are you seeing anything that makes it look like somebody is trying to manipulate your vote? And do you feel like there aren't enough checks along the way to make sure that if somebody wanted to manipulate the vote, that they would be able to? And I think once you think about it that way, you would see it's very hard to really manipulate even your vote, let alone like thousands of votes, enough to sway an election, right? Mm-hmm. When you come in, you got to show your ID. You've got to affirm and sign that you still live at a certain place, right? It's an electronic system that keeps up with your residence. It's very hard to come in and vote as someone else or vote in a different place. The checks are already in the system. They're built in the election code. I know I don't run elections, but I know the election code very well. It is full. It is full of checks along the way to make sure that nothing happens. Sometimes maybe too many.
Yeah.
Right. You said your appointment is over in November. Houston City Council member Abby Kamen officially entered the race in December. Democrat Judge Audrey Lawton Evans and Republican Jacqueline Lucy Smith also joined the contest. Are you going to run or just serve out your appointment?
Just serve. It's too late for me to sign up to run, so just serve out my appointment. I'm not someone who wanted to run for office. I may do that in the future. I have little kids, and so I have a lot of respect for people who do that, but that's not something I'm doing right now.
So you just took this to get your hair a little grayer and then move on back into the private
That's right.
sector.
That's right. Luckily, I knew what I was walking
into.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. At this point, though, you're saying, Judge Abbott, bluster, nothing has happened yet, but you're keeping an eye on it.
That's right.
Governor Abbott.
Governor Abbott.
Governor
Yes, sorry.
Abbott, yes.
What did I call him?
Judge.
He used to be a judge.
Yeah, at one point.
Yes. Interim Harris County Attorney Jonathan Fombonne, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.